On Thursday's broadcast of MSNBC's Rachel Maddow show, House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler, DNY, stated that Special Counsel Robert Mueller wants to testify privately, but is willing to make a public opening statement and have the transcript of his testimony released to the public. Nadler said, "I think I can say, at this point, that he wants to testify in private." Nadler added, he's willing to make an opening statement, but he wants to testify in private. Nadler further stated that a transcript of Mueller's testimony would be publicly released Thursday on Fox News Channel's Hannity. Representative Matt Gaetz, RFL, explained why President Donald Trump's actions with his executive order giving Attorney General William Barr to compel the intelligence community to cooperate with his investigation shows that former FBI Director James Comey, former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper and former CIA Director John Brennan were all in jeopardy. "I think what's most important about this executive order is it shows Comey, Clapper and Brennan all are in jeopardy," he said. "If this was just a question of misconduct at the FBI, the president wouldn't have given the Attorney General such sweeping authority to be able to compel the production of evidence from the intelligence community, from the CIA, from the NSA. And that's where I believe there was evidence that was withheld from the FISA courts where George Papadopoulos was saying, 'We weren't concluding with Russians. That would be illegal.' That was withheld." "Now you mentioned the Gang of 8 briefings, Dan," he continued. "What's so important about that is they included statements of exculpatory evidence that would have shown that Carter Page and George Papadopoulos were not a basis to continue this investigation. And that is not going to line up with what was presented to the FISA courts. That disparate display of the evidence is going to show where the corruption occurred and they should be very worried." Transgender actress and activist Laverne Cox slammed pro-life legislation and claimed that using the correct gender pronouns is a matter of life and death for people questioning their gender identity. Addressing students at Pitzer College's graduation ceremony in California, the "Orange is the New Black" star referenced the recent passing of a restrictive anti-abortion law in Alabama, a move that has enraged progressive campaigners. "So, this week we all know what happened in Alabama, that the most restrictive anti-abortion law was passed there this week," Laverne Cox began, urging the crowd to boo the state's new legislation. The actor then explained that after retweeting the phrase "women's body, women's choice," someone said the phrase defectively erases trans brothers from the abortion debate. It's a reference to the biologically female women who have transitioned to men but also retain reproductive organs and become pregnant. "They basically said that, women and people who identify as women are not the only people who are affected by anti-abortion laws," said Cox. "That people who identify as women are not the only people who get pregnant, and we can applaud for that. It's the truth. If I were that trans man, I would really want to have language that incorporated and included my experience," Cox added. "Thinking about this reminded me that a language is also a place of struggle, but that this isn't just about being politically correct." The actor continued. "This is not just about virtue signaling, that when we use language that excludes people on pertinent issues it can jeopardize their health and well-being. This is about language that is appropriate and fully inclusive as a matter of life and death for so many people out there. For me, as a trans woman, I can't get pregnant. I'm very grateful for that. But it's an issue that I don't actually have to think about. But if we are the person who has to deal with the issue, it is so important to be inclusive and to have our issues dealt with." Cox, who is biologically male, is Hollywood's most high-profile campaigner on trans issues. Cox became the first openly transgender person to be featured on the cover of Time magazine and also be nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award. In response to Alabama's strict new abortion law, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors voted this week to institute a 1-year travel ban to the Yellowhammer State for county business. Los Angeles County Supervisor Hilda L. Solis, who authored the travel measure, said in a statement that Alabama's new abortion law is an attack not only confined to the residents of those states, but an act of aggression upon all of us. Solis claimed in the statement that a woman's right to an abortion is part of the very fabric of the United States. "We must stand in solidarity and in opposition against extremist and unconstitutional laws that put the health and well-being of families at risk," Solis continued. "The constitutional and human right to a safe and legal abortion is part of the very fabric of the United States. As such, Los Angeles County will stand against all attempts to dismantle the protections afforded by Roe v. Wade and the U.S. Constitution." Solis said the board's vote on the travel measure sends a strong signal that infringing upon an individual's rights to reproductive health and privacy are not American values. The co-author of the statement, LA County Supervisor Sheila Cole, said, "Everyone knows that banning abortion won't stop women from accessing abortion services even when it puts them in unsafe medical situations." Cole also claimed women who are poor in Alabama will not be able to safely access abortion. In Alabama, women who have the money will be able to safely access abortion, but women who are poor will not, Cole said in the released statement. Women across the country must resist legislation that will limit reproductive choices that are essential to every woman's health. The motion would also prohibit those conducting official LA County business to travel to Alabama except in cases of emergency response, training, or assistance, or other legally required matters where the failure to authorize such travel would seriously harm the county's interests. According to the office, a letter will be sent to Republican Governor Kay Ivey expressing the board's distaste for the bill. The infamous American Taliban John Walker Lind wrote a few letters to reporters and authors praising Afghan Taliban jihad and the Islamic State, ISIS/ISIL, prompting recipients of the correspondence to label him unrepentant as authorities released the jihadi into U.S. communities on Thursday. The Islamic State is clearly very sincere and serious about fulfilling the long-neglected religious obligation to establish a caliphate through armed struggle, which is the only correct method, Lind wrote to NBC News Los Angeles station KNBC from prison in a letter unveiled Wednesday. NBC reveals. Lind expressed that sentiment, in response to a question from the station about whether ISIS represents Islam after ISIS had beheaded Americans in well-publicized videos, including journalist James Foley in August 2014. It was his third of 4 letters in a series of correspondence with KNBC. After initially expressing remorse about joining the Taliban, Lind sounded a different tune to NBC, goading that he was proud to take part in the Afghan jihad. The American Taliban has maintained correspondence with news outlets from prison, including Graham Wood from The Atlantic. His more than 17 years in captivity seem, on the basis of this correspondence, to have converted Lind from an al-Qaeda supporter to an Islamic State supporter, Wood determined. Lind is expected to move to either Northern Virginia, right outside of the U.S. Capitol, or return to his hometown in Marin County located in San Francisco's Bay Area. The chances that Marin County will someday have an unrepentant jihadist praying in its mosques, and soaking in its, woman-free, hot tubs, seem very high, The Atlantic reports. Robert Young Pelton from The Atlantic also spoke to Lind. He wanted martyrdom, and he said so, Pelton indicated, referring to the American Taliban. Pelton indicated. Lind seemed like a sociopath who had been working really hard to be with a group that was killing Americans and fellow Muslims. Authorities certainly know about Lind's continuing radicalism, not least because they have read every word of my correspondence with him. Lind's early release comes about 3 years before the end of his 20-year jail stint, courtesy of a plea agreement. Under the plea pact, prosecutors reportedly dropped 9 of 10 counts leveled against Lind in 2002, including one for murder conspiracy. Lind pled guilty to disobeying an executive order outlawing support to the Taliban and for possessing a weapon in Afghanistan, Fox News notes. The Mercury News learned that Lind's release comes a few years short of his 20-year sentence due to credits for good conduct and time served before his sentencing. Authorities released the American Taliban despite concerns from current and former U.S. officials that he remains a potential Islamic terrorist threat, NBC News learned, adding. Underscoring those worries is Lind's 2015 handwritten letter from prison to NBC's Los Angeles station KNBC, revealed for the first time Wednesday, in which he expressed support for ISIS, saying the terror group that beheaded Americans was doing a spectacular job. Furthermore, documents obtained by Foreign Policy show that, as early 2017, the National Counterterrorism Center stressed that Lind continued to advocate for global jihad and write and translate violent extremist texts. Last March, he told a TV producer that he would continue to spread violent extremism Islam upon his release, according to Fox News. Lind's correspondence with journalists and other comments he made in prison formed part of the basis of a 2016 U.S. intelligence document, produced by the National Counterterrorism Center, saying that he continued to advocate for global jihad and to write and translate violent extremist texts. NBC News learned that Judge T.S. Ellis imposed exceptionally restrictive conditions on his release, including mandatory monitoring of his internet usage, banning him from foreign travel and requiring mental health counseling. Lind has expressed interest in wanting to live in Northern Virginia, right outside the nation's capital, his lawyer confirmed to the NBC affiliate in the Bay Area, KNTV. It is one of the most restrictive sets of conditions I've seen in a terrorism case, and it probably speaks to their concerns about him, Seamus Hughes, a former U.S. intelligence official who studies extremism at George Washington University, told NBC News, adding, "The conditions of his supervised release last 3 years, after which Lind will be clear formal supervision." U.S. officials told NBC News the FBI is likely to keep a close eye on him. It's unclear whether authorities would have a legal predicate to obtain a national security warrant to intercept his communications. NBC News reached out to Lind's lawyer and a representative of his family for comments, but they declined. In his letters to NBC for Los Angeles signed under a pseudonym, he said he was proud to take part in the Afghan jihad. In a rare show of bipartisanship, Senators Richard Shelby, R.L., and Maggie Hassan, D.N.H., wrote a letter to the Federal Bureau of Prisons last week expressing concern over the looming release of convicted American Taliban jihadi and other terrorists. U.S. troops captured him in late 2001 soon after invading Afghanistan in response to 9/11.